To today's COVID-19 vaccination capacity building for health workers learning session. Today's session is focused on supply and logistics for COVID-19 vaccine products. Next slide. We just want to let everyone know that interpretation is available in several languages today, in French and Spanish. And you access the interpretation by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom right of the Zoom toolbar and choosing the language you would like to hear. You can mute the original audio if you only want to hear the interpretation, and that's just below the language choices. Next slide. We really look forward to your questions and comments today, so please put those in the Q&A feature just to the left of that interpretation icon, also at the bottom right of the Zoom toolbar. If you have any IT or logistic or questions about the certificate of attendance, please put those in the chat. We'll be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A features. Next slide. This session is being recorded and your attendance is consent to be recorded. Thank you for that. The recordings will be shared after the session, the recordings in English, the recordings in French and in Spanish, and we'll share a link to the website where they're being archived. Also, a certificate of attendance will be available through the University of New Mexico, where Project ECHO is based, via a link in the chat, which we'll share toward the end of the session. Next slide. Just a note about data use. We take data use and stewardship very seriously, and we want to ensure everyone that your individual data will be de-identified and kept confidential. Next slide. Also a reminder that this live learning session is built to complement the WHO trainings on COVID-19 vaccination. And there are two learning streams, one focused on national deployment and vaccination planning, the other on training for health workers. And we'll share links to both of those online trainings in the chat. Next slide. With that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Shoshana Golden at WHO for the formal introduction. Shoshana.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bruce. And welcome to all our participants to today's session. Next slide, please. I'll start, as always, with a few announcements. The COVID-19 vaccine-specific resources training is now available in all UN languages and Portuguese. This training provides short instructional videos that are under 7 minutes in length for each of the COVID-19 vaccine products that have received emergency use listing and/or SAGE interim recommendations. With the translated versions, some of these videos will be coming on to the training shortly. Not all videos may be available at the current moment, but they are coming soon. We'd also like to wish a Ramadan Mubarak to all those who are practicing, and we have some guidance here for safe Ramadan practices in the context of COVID-19. We also have a number of resources that are coming soon. Most notably, we have a health worker training that is going to be really designed in microbytes, so small pieces of information that are accessible by phone and other non-internet based resources. Those should be available in the next couple of weeks, and we'll share out the links once they're ready. In addition, we have a job aid on how many doses in a vaccine vial that will be coming soon. There have been a lot of questions as folks are finding some extra doses at the bottom of their vaccine vial, and this job aid helps you in understanding how you can use those doses and when you can use those doses. Next slide, please. Today, we will be focusing on supply and logistics for COVID-19 vaccines. We'll start with storage and handling of COVID-19 vaccines, followed by how to deal with vaccines that do not have a vaccine vial monitor. As always, we'll then go to our what's next, an opportunity for you to ask your questions and us to answer through the Q&A feature. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide, please? Wonderful, thank you. So the goal for today's session is to help health workers to prepare for and operationalize the supply and logistics for COVID-19 vaccines. There are two learning objectives for today's session. The first is to provide key information on the storage and handling of these vaccine products that have received either emergency use listing or SAGE interim recommendations at the point of service. And the second is to explain how to deal with vaccines that don't have a vaccine vial monitor. Next slide, please. I'd now like to turn it over to Marisol Castro, who'll be walking us through the next two presentations.
Thank you, Shoshana. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our audiences. So for this session, we will be focusing on the storage and handling of COVID-19 vaccine, as well as the management of vaccines without Vvm. So let's start with the first topic. Next slide, please. Okay, so currently there are 4 vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines, that are either under EUL or SAGE recommendation. And we will discuss the different, how to optimize the shelf life of these vaccines during storage. And we will base on the different conditions. So for Pfizer, so there are 3 vaccines that would require freezing temperature for storage: Pfizer, Moderna, and Janssen. And for the frozen and open vial, for Pfizer vaccine, there are 2 storage options. First is to keep it at -80 to -60 degrees temperature for 6 months from the date of manufacture, or it can also be kept at -25 degrees to -15 degrees for 2 weeks. However, we just want to make a note on this, that this is still undergoing expert review, and we don't have yet the, it's not yet updated for the document of under emergency use listing. For Pfizer vaccine that is already thawed and unopened, it has to be kept at, it can be kept at 2 to 8 degrees in a refrigerator for 5 days. It should not be left at room temperature for more than 2 hours after thawing, and it should not be refrozen. For Moderna vaccine, it has to be stored at -25 to -15 degrees centigrade until expiration date. And then once it is thawed, and the unopened vial should be kept at +2 to 8 in a refrigerator for up to 30 days after thawing or until expiration date. It has to be kept also at -25 to -15 degrees centigrade for 24 months or until expiration date. For thawed and open vial, it has to be kept at +2 to 8 degrees centigrade in a refrigerator for up to 3 months after thawing or until original or updated expiration date comes. It should not be refrozen. The 4th vaccine is the AstraZeneca. It should not be frozen. Once you receive it in country, you should keep it at +2 to 8 degrees centigrade in a refrigerator until the expiration date. It should not be frozen. So below we put some we put a reference to the different resources where you can find the different vaccine explainers specific for this vaccine. Next slide, please. So now we will discuss how to preserve the vaccine potency during transport by choosing the appropriate passive containers and coolant packs. For Pfizer vaccine, an opened frozen vial should be kept at -80 to -60 centigrade. This applies to store-to-facility delivery or long-range or long-duration delivery. During transport, you should use the manufacturer-provided soft bags or other thermoshipper, like commercial thermoshipper, marked with the UN 1845, which is the international code for dry ice, and supply with dry ice as coolant pack. You can also use Arctec with PM or for ultra low temperature. And then for an open frozen vial at -25 to -15 degrees centigrade, which applies to delivery from store to facility, or long duration, long range delivery. For Pfizer, Moderna, and Janssen, that has to be kept frozen. You can use the WHO pre-qualified cold boxes with frozen water packs. Of course, this does not apply to AstraZeneca. And then for the thawed and open vial, kept at positive 2 to 8 degrees centigrade, which applies for store-to-facility or long-range, long-duration delivery, you can use any WHO pre-qualified insulated passive containers with conditioned water packs. Each box should be enclosed with temperature data logger and electronic freeze indicator, because this is already thawed and it should not be refreezed. And this applies for all the 4 vaccines. For the thawed and open vial at positive 2 to 8 degrees centigrade, which applies to transporting vaccine to outreach session or short-range, short-duration delivery, these are the following guidance. You can use WHO pre-qualified insulated passive containers for the following purposes. For the storing of an open vaccine vial, use a freeze-preventive vaccine carrier with frozen water packs or standard vaccine carrier with conditioned water packs. Bring as many as you need, because it depends on how many vials you need to bring at the session point. Alternatively, you can use a small or medium cold box with conditioned water packs. And then for keeping the open vial, because this is transporting to the session point, so we encourage to bring at least 1 vaccine carrier with foam pad and conditioned water packs or cool water pack, because this container will be used to load the opened vaccine once the session is ongoing. During transport, unopened vials can be loaded as well in this container, but these vaccines or vaccine vials should be used first at the start of the session. For keeping the supply frozen water packs or replenishing water packs of vaccine carrier, we are encouraging to use a vaccine carrier or small or medium cold bags to contain the extra supply of the water packs. Ideally, it has to be in a frozen state, but before use for replenishment mid-session, they have to be prepared accordingly, meaning to condition the water packs before they can be used to replenish in the respective vaccine carriers. We would like to highlight that no vaccine should be kept here due to the risk of freezing. This may not be necessary if you are ensured that of the supply of frozen water packs at the session point. Next slide, please. So these are some consideration that we need to keep in mind during transport of vaccine. Ensure that vaccine is properly labeled when it was taken from either ULT to -20, which applies to Pfizer, or from -20 to +2 to 8 degrees centigrade, which applies to Pfizer, Moderna, and Janssen, because they have to be thawed. And communicate this information to the receiving facility for proper monitoring of remaining shelf life. Never transport already opened or diluted vaccine vial. Do not open the passive container during transport, and use the correct number and size of coolant packs exactly as specified by the manufacturer to maintain the cold life. Transport the containers in a covered vehicle as much as possible to avoid exposure to direct sunlight, which will reduce the cold life. And during parking, if it's needed, avoid parking the vehicle for extended period under the sun or cold climate, to also prevent the unnecessary exposure to heat or direct sunlight. So condition on the use of temperature monitoring device during transport. For the store to facility or long range, long duration delivery, and for vaccine frozen at the ultra low temperature and transported with dry ice, such as the case of Pfizer, properly packed thermoshipper with dry ice or Arctec with appropriate PCM, which is good for ULT, can actually keep the vaccine under ultra low temperature for 5 days. The presence of dry ice when used when transporting using a thermoshipper is an indication that ULT is maintained for as long as the delivery is completed less than 5 days. The temperature monitoring device is not necessary in this case. For vaccine frozen at -20 degrees and transported with frozen water packs, and vaccine transported at +2 to 8 degrees centigrade with conditioned water packs, the use of temperature monitoring device is recommended for store to facility delivery for each of the box. Check the temperature only upon arrival at the receiving store. And then when transporting vaccine at +2 to 8 degrees centigrade with freeze-preventive vaccine carrier with frozen water packs for session use a temperature monitoring device is not necessary. Make sure water packs are properly maintained and replenished at session site as needed. So if you don't have a freeze-preventive vaccine carrier, you can also use a standard vaccine carrier with conditioned water packs for transporting vaccine at +2 to 8 degrees centigrade. But you need to make sure that you apply the best practices to prevent the vaccine from accidentally freezing and to protect the label of the vaccine vial from getting wet or getting removed when they get direct contact to the water packs. Next slide, please. So now let's go to the optimizing vaccine potency during vaccination session. So for an opened and diluted vial for Pfizer, so only Pfizer needs dilution among these 4 vaccines, by the way. Keep the vaccine at +2 to 8 degrees centigrade in a freeze-preventive vaccine carrier with frozen water packs. If replenishing water packs is not possible, you can actually keep an open vial at room temperature for up to +30 degrees, but you have to use it within 2 hours. Do not refreeze. For Moderna, you can keep it at +2 to 8 in a freeze-preventive vaccine carrier with frozen water packs. Again, if replenishing of water packs is not possible, you can actually keep the vaccine at room temperature up to 25 degrees centigrade and use within 12 hours. This should not be refrozen. For Janssen vaccine, you can keep it at +2 to 8 in a freeze-preventive vaccine carrier, and you should not refreeze it. And this also applies for AstraZeneca. Now, sometimes there's a possibility that some vials will be unused for the session. So it's going to be remain unopened and left over for the session. So this vaccine can be used still for the succeeding day's session for as long as we respect the shelf life at +2 to 8 degrees centigrade and cold chain is maintained all throughout. So with regards to the maximum days of unopened vials that can still be used for next session, unopened vials can be put back in the refrigerator and used for next session provided cold chain is respected in each session and the remaining shelf life of vaccine at 2 to 8 is closely monitored. You can refer to the previous slide's maximum shelf life of an open vial kept at 2 to 8 and make sure vaccine is labeled with date of thawing to properly monitor the remaining shelf life. This is particularly for Pfizer, Moderna, and Janssen vaccine. For AstraZeneca, because it's already kept at 2 to 8, unopened vials can definitely be used until the expiration date, provided cold chain is maintained in every session. So for the open diluted vaccine vial, again, of course, it has to be kept at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade by placing the open vial on a foam pad, which is the usual practice that we are doing even in other like campaigns like polio and measles, of a separate vaccine carrier with conditioned water packs. This same vaccine carrier can be used to store small number of an open vaccine vial that is expected to be consumed immediately. For example, in the case of a long queue. This will prevent frequent opening of the main vaccine carrier that we're using for storing the bulk supply of the unopened vaccine. As mentioned earlier, we are encouraging to bring extra frozen water packs and ensure to replenish water packs mid-session or as needed. And you have to make sure that it is properly prepared before putting it in the vaccine carrier for replenishment. So for example, if you're using a pre-preventive vaccine carrier, you don't need to condition it. You can already put the frozen water packs right away. But if you're using a standard vaccine carrier, you have to make sure that it is conditioned first before you replenish the vaccine carrier. With regards to the application of the multi-dose vial policy, or MDVP, all of this vaccine has to be discarded 6 hours after the first puncture or at the end of immunization session, whichever comes first. In the case of Pfizer vaccine, the first puncture would be when the time it was diluted. For Moderna, Janssen, AstraZeneca, it will be at the time when the first dose of the vaccine is extracted from the vial. Next slide, please. Now let's move to managing the vaccine without VVM. Next slide, please. So our key message is, if a heat-sensitive vaccine have no VVM, there is no way to monitor the effect of cumulative heat exposure above positive 2 to 8 degrees centigrade. It is therefore safer to use either frozen water packs with freeze-preventive vaccine carrier or conditioned water packs with a standard vaccine carrier. Cool water packs can only be used for vaccine with proven stability at temperature greater than 8 degrees centigrade and during short journey, or in a standard vaccine carrier used for open vials for immediate use. Next slide, please. So in order to maintain the potency of the vaccine without BBM, it is very important that we use the appropriate coolant material and passive container. All passive containers and coolant packs should be WHO pre-qualified when they are used for transport and during session, or they should have been laboratory tested to establish thermal performance in accordance with the relevant PQS verification protocol. So we provided a link below. So we are discussing about pre-preventive vaccine carrier and standard vaccine carrier. So this image in this slide shows you the difference between the two. So the pre-preventive vaccine carrier definitely has a separating compartment for putting the frozen water packs. And the the standard vaccine carrier do not have this barrier. So any correctly prepared standard vaccine carrier with conditioned ice packs or pre-preventive vaccine carrier with frozen water packs are proven to maintain vaccine temperature at positive 2 to 8 degrees centigrade. Depending on ambient temperature, water packs may need to be replenished mid-session or as needed, depending if it's very hot, maybe you may need more frequent replenishment. During session, the use of temperature monitoring device is not necessary as long as the replenishment of the water packs are done diligently and all best practices are applied for managing the vaccine during the session. Next slide, please. So this table provides a summary of how to effectively use the coolant packs and insulated passive containers for vaccines without VVM. So the thermoshipper with dry ice or Arctic with ultra-low temperature PCM applies only for the Pfizer vaccine. The pre-preventive vaccine carrier with frozen water packs applies for all vaccine. But we have a note for Pfizer vaccine. The shelf life at 2 to 8 degrees, as noted in the earlier slide, is only 5 days from thawing date. So therefore, thawed vaccine must be transported and utilized within this period to make sure that the vaccine remains potent at the time of administration. When using standard vaccine carrier with cold packs, along with conditioned water packs, this combination applies for all vaccine, including the diluents. When using, but again, we have the same caution for Pfizer vaccine for consuming the vaccine within the 5 days shelf life at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade. When using the standard vaccine carrier or cold box with frozen water packs, this only applies for transporting vaccine from primary store to health facility and for Pfizer vaccine, Moderna, and Janssen vaccines. When using standard vaccine carrier with cold bags and cool water pack, this only applies for the diluent, and when transporting vaccine and managing vaccine in an outreach session. So, however, the cool water packs used with Pfizer vaccine and Janssen vaccine can only be used at sub-zero ambient temperature to prevent vaccine from freezing. And the warm water pack, when used with the standard vaccine carrier or cold bags, will only apply for diluent. Do not use it for vaccine because of the risk of unnecessarily exposing the vaccine in hot temperature that may affect the vaccine potency at the time of administration. Next slide, please. So the following are general principles for choosing coolant packs. Packs apply to vaccines without Vvms. Generally, vaccines without Vvms should only be transported using either the conditioned water packs in a standard passive container or frozen water packs in a freeze-preventive vaccine carrier. In warm and hot climates, cool water packs should not be used for vaccine transport because cumulative heat exposure to temperatures above 8 degrees centigrade cannot be monitored adequately. In cold climates, use of cool water packs to protect freeze-sensitive vaccines from exposure to sub-zero conditions or to prevent refreezing of thawed vaccine. Warm water packs should never be used for this purpose because of the risk of prolonged exposure to temperature above 8 degrees centigrade. During session, open vaccine vials must always be kept at temperature between 2 to 8 degrees centigrade, and this can be achieved by using conditioned water packs in a standard vaccine carrier or using frozen water packs in a pre-preventive vaccine carrier. Extra supply of frozen water packs must be taken to an outreach session unless there is a secured supply on site. The temperature of monitoring device is not necessary as long as the appropriate coolant pack, meaning they are in the right condition, size, and quantity, and insulated passive container are chosen and properly used. The vaccine stored in ultra-low temperature using dry ice can keep the vaccine in ULT conditions during storage and transport. Next slide, please. And finally, during session, we would like to highlight again that health workers are recommended to prepare the following to keep the vaccines without VVM at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade to ensure that the vaccine remains potent. The use of freeze-preventive vaccine carrier with frozen water packs. These should be used as a main storage during session. Bring as many as necessary and keep the number of vials required for the session. This type of insulated passive container is ideal to prevent accidental freezing of vaccine. Check the status of the frozen water packs every time a new vial is taken out of this vaccine carrier to avoid as much as possible unnecessarily opening this carrier. Replenish frozen water packs as needed and do not allow the frozen water packs to turn into conditioned water packs or cool water packs. So alternatively, you can also use the standard vaccine carrier with conditioned ice packs for this purpose with proper precaution taken to avoid accidental freezing of the vaccine and also exposing the vaccine to the vaccine vial to label to becoming wet. And then next is the standard vaccine carrier with conditioned water packs. These should be used to store an open diluted vial during session. Health workers should maintain the good practice in maintaining vaccine potency by opening only the one vial at a time and withdrawing a dose only when it is ready to be administered. Keeping the open vial in a foam pad over conditioned water packs is the good practice, and keeping the label dry and intact to enable monitoring when the vaccine should be discarded. That is 6 hours or at the end of immunization session, whichever comes first. And the third equipment is the standard vaccine carrier or cold bags or thermal shipper loaded with spare frozen water packs. No vaccine should be kept inside due to the risk of freezing. The extra supply of frozen water packs will be used as replenishment and bring enough to resupply all vaccine carrier mid-session. ensure that frozen water packs are conditioned before use in a standard vaccine carrier. But this is not necessary when you are using the pre-preventive vaccine carrier. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's the end of our presentation. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marisol, for that fantastic overview of the storage, handling, and use of these vaccines without the VVM. I'll quickly talk through what's next, and then we'll turn to our questions and answers. So next slide, please. All of the webinar materials are available on this TechNet link that you find here on this slide. They are really easily organized with the presentations, the recordings in all 3 languages, and the FAQ responses. In addition, you are welcome and your experiences on TechNet and Telegram, and you can see here the links for those channels. Next slide, please. As always, the recordings from this session will be available in English, French, and Spanish. This is our last session dedicated to health workers, but we will have a number of additional sessions targeted to national and subnational focal points. And of course, as always, all are welcome to join those sessions if you find the content interesting or useful. Next week on the 20th of April, we'll be talking about how to mobilize financing for the scale-up of COVID-19 vaccination. On the 4th of May, we'll be talking about different COVID-19 vaccine product recommendations and how to understand these nuances and the differences. On 18th May, we'll be looking at private sector engagement, so how to really maximize this public-private collaboration. Feel free to register using the links on this slide or the ECHO website. Next slide, please. We'll now turn to the Q&A portion of our session. So please feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A feature. And I'll ask our panelists. So Marisol, Adama, and Solo, if you can turn on your videos, and I'll start to ask some questions. So as you hear the question, please just indicate if you'd like to respond, and we'll go through these accordingly. The next question is, how is it determined what temperature is optimal for a vaccine? So how do manufacturers know what temperature range is right? Adama, would you like to answer this question? Or Solo, is that Solo? Please come in.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Thank you. I think this is a regulatory information that is stated right in the vaccine labeling actually, and from the manufacturer this is labeled, and also say during the recommendation of the vaccine spell out the different storage conditions. I mean storage temperature and light. So this is a regulatory information that is stated upfront on the vaccine label, based on the stability, the heat stability data by the manufacturer.
Thank you so much, Solo. That's really helpful. Fantastic. Okay, we'll go to the next question, which is, what are the general recommendations to manage temperature deviations with electronic data loggers, either during storage or transport? So how to manage these different temperature deviations?
So,
Marisol, do you want to come in?
Yeah.
Or Adama, please feel free.
Yeah, do you hear me?
We hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a great question, and it's lucky to have the electronic devices to monitor the temperature during storage and transportation. This is key because, as we said, it's good to know what's happening. Is the vaccine exposed to temperature that are risky for this vaccine in terms of damaging the vaccine? So again, having this data logger to monitor is key. Now, the data logger will show that is a risk of exposure to, damaging temperature. So obviously, the data logger is helping us to know what's happening in, within the enclosure that we have, where we have the vaccine. Now it's us to take action. The key recommendation is we should look at the data logger and understand what's happening and then take action. So the key recommendation is to take action to put the vaccine in the right range of temperature based on what is exposed through the data logger. So if the vaccine is exposed to temperature outside the right range, we should make sure that we bring back the vaccine to the right range of temperature. Many action can be taken for that, but I think the key recommendation is obviously to take the right action. We can develop more if the question is more specific. Over.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Adama. Our next question is there a calculation for the carriers that can tell you the number of frozen packs for the number of vials that you can use to maintain the correct temperature? So the question is really, how do you know the right number of frozen packs for your vaccine vials?
Yeah, the number of the number of frozen packs depend on the container, the insulated container, mean that the cold box or the vaccine carrier. Each vaccine carrier and each cold box is provided with clear protocol how many coolant pack you have to put before loading the vaccine. If you do not respect that, mean that you are deviating from that protocol. And you should respect the number of coolant pack, mean that be it frozen pack or a conditioned ice pack or a cool water pack that is indicated by the manufacturer of that cold box. You should not start elaborating yourself. Oh, maybe if you have 4 there, you should not start elaborating. Oh, maybe I can put 3. Then this assumption should be based on your study of the distribution route. If you have experience that if you put 3 then and making national experiences with that, you can only based on that local experience validate that number. Otherwise, you have to stick to the manufacturer's indication. Over.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Solo. Our next question is, if a foam pad is not available, can a conditioned ice pack be used to put the vial, to keep the vial cold between 2 and 8 degrees during the session?
Could you repeat the question,
so without
please?
A foam pad, absolutely. So if there's no foam pad available,
If there's no what?
No foam pad. If there's no foam pad available, can a conditioned ice pack be used instead?
Oh, sorry, myself?
No.
Yeah, well, definitely, we expect that the vaccine carrier where the open vial is kept should have the conditioned water packs or a cool water packs at least. They can definitely be used without a foam pad, but care must be taken because we observed some practices during mass campaign where a freeze-sensitive vaccine may be put on directly on the water pack container. And this, since if you're using conditioned ice packs, this will, risk freezing the vaccine, right? So you should not do that if you are using a conditioned water packs, but you can do for cool water packs. But it's still the best practice to put like a foam pad, but without it, definitely it can maintain as long as the number of water packs in a vaccine carrier is maintained. Normally it's 4 pieces, and protect the vaccine from touching the conditioned water packs. And then the only thing is that because the water packs is directly exposed, and we expect this vaccine carrier will be constantly opened because you're administering the vaccine, that the water packs needs to be monitored and replenished as frequent as needed.
Maybe to add to what Maricel said, when you use the conditioned ice pack, because you really need to make sure that it's conditioned. Conditions should not be something like, you know, just I put it outside and then I put it in the carrier. It should really be conditions as requested. Then it's recommended to have a monitor. We are talking about the kind of logger to follow the temperature in the carrier during the transportation. It may be, for example, freeze tag. Recommended to be with the condition aspect, because we want to make sure that the vaccine is not exposed during the transportation, and the only way we can really ensure that, and at the arrival of the vaccine carrier to the destination, is to have this device that show us that there was no exposure to freezing in the carrier.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those responses. We have a question about how the frozen vaccine should be liquefied at the point of use.
Okay, it depends on the vaccine. For example, for Moderna vaccine, before use, it should be thawed at room temperature of 15 to 25 degrees for an hour, or thaw the vaccine in a refrigerator for 2 to 8 degrees for 2 hours and 30 minutes. The vial should be left at room temperature for 15 minutes before they are administered. But for the Janssen vaccine, thawed the vaccine at room temperature up to 25 degrees centigrade. Individual vials take about an hour to thaw, and a carton of 10 vials takes about 2 hours to thaw. So this has to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, you can also thaw the vaccine in a refrigerator at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade. Individual vials takes about 2 hours to thaw, and a carton of 10 vials takes about 12 hours to thaw. So for the Pfizer vaccine, it has to be thawed for 3 hours at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade in a refrigerator, or for 30 minutes at room temperature up to 25 degrees before dilution. But the vaccine should not sit exposed in a room temperature for more than 2 hours. So this has to be kept in mind when thawing. Thank you.
Wonderful. And I'll add to that we do have that COVID-19 vaccine specific training resources course that I mentioned in the announcements. So in addition to the really useful information Marisol just provided, if you want to log on to OpenWHO and go through that course, it will provide you with the information on handling, preparing, and administering each of those vaccine products. So it can provide you really nuanced information about that full range of the COVID-19 vaccination process. Okay, so I'll go on to our next question. Why is there a difference of temperature in the inner and outer ILR temperature measuring device?
Not sure that if I understand that question. The ILR is ice lining refrigerator, and the difference between in and outer. You mean inside the refrigerator? Inside the refrigerator.
I think that would be probably if there's a difference in temperature of a temperature logger inside the package versus one that's outside. I think that might be where the question is going.
Oh, okay. Yes, in general, in the ice lining refrigerators, you have the temperature sensor that you can read, the thermometer that you can read outside. The sensor is located in the middle of the refrigerator. And if you put an independent thermometer inside with the vaccine in the refrigerator, the location may be different. For instance, if you put at the bottom of the ice line refrigerator, you will with this thermometer will record a much lower temperature than what you see in the thermometer that you can read from outside. So this is the difference that you can see. So, or if you put it on the top, the temperature may be different. And this is not actually a problem. The problem is that if this outer thermometer, additional thermometer you are putting in the risk areas. The risk area means that where the temperature may be far different from the nominal temperature you read from the equipment device. If this is really very different, then you will have the problem. Let's say that you should identify those areas, not store a certain vaccine in those locations. For example, for ILR vaccines, ILR refrigerator, don't store free sensitive vaccine in those areas. But this was actually before. Normally now, with the grade A type of refrigerators, you don't have these different big differences within the inside temperature of the ILR vaccines, ILR refrigerators. So WHO specifications have been made for grade A's refrigerator to ensure that you will, whatever the location of this thermometer will be, you should not record a negative temperature. Hope this is helpful. This is helpful. Thanks.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Solo. Great. We'll go to our next question, which is, have you heard of any issues with downloading the data loggers? So in particular, if folks are having limited access to computers or internet, has this been flagged as an issue? And if so, how can folks mitigate this problem? So the question is about the download of the data loggers if there's limited access to internet or computers.
Yeah, I think,
Adama here.
Yeah, I think probably the country can give the Adama. Okay, Adama, go ahead.
No. I think yeah, the question is open. But what I wanted to say is, yeah, that's the problem generally when we move from one platform to another platform. I used to say that the health worker should be the first data logger of this first system of monitoring. No any other system should really not working to take away the responsibility of the health worker. So having said that, I think that we should not be in a situation where we don't have a kind of lack of redundancy in monitoring. If possible, we should have data loggers that are, keeping the data, and then we can download later. But we should have a system that also can help the health worker to see right away what's happening in the refrigerator. Any other thing is an added value, so that we are not facing the situation where we don't have any clue of what is in the refrigerator, but the data should be logged somewhere else and then reflected to the health worker. I want here to really emphasize the fact that the health worker remains the first responsible and the first level of security in monitoring the system, the refrigerator, the temperature in the refrigerator, and he should be at any time able to say, this is the temperature in my refrigerator. Over. Go ahead, Solo.
Just to add, I think that any device, temperature, especially temperature monitoring device, a country is introducing, you have to make sure that you have the platform and the staff trained to read it, and you should ensure that it will not make any sense just to start ordering for fancy any new modern of temperature devices that people cannot download and read the temperature on site. This is what I wanted just to compliment. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that response. We've got a question about what is an insulated passive container?
Passive, what it is. Okay, passive container, I think that this is the terminology that is used as a generic that cover cold boxes, vaccine carriers. It is a box that is built with the materials of the box that is built with insulated materials to minimize the leakage of the heat or the cold. And we call this insulated container.
Yeah. We just to complement also, we call it passive container because it possibly maintains cold chain without the use of electricity, and it's portable and can be used, like for example during transport or session.
Exactly. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And the last question I see in our Q&A is about guidelines for the administration of vaccine in rural areas. Are you aware? Do you know if there are guidelines on supply and logistics considerations for rural areas specifically?
I tried to read that question. Actually, it's not very clear to me. Definitely, the guidelines for rural areas is exactly the same as in any places where you are administering the vaccine in a session. But what caught my attention in that question is, I'm confused. Does it mean that syringes, it seems to me that there is a pre-filling of syringes where the pre-filled syringes needs to be transported in a cold box. So I just want to highlight that we do not encourage pre-filling of syringes. It's definitely not a safe practice for vaccination, and highly discouraged because of the risk of having high vaccine wastage, as well as risk for vaccine contamination that may lead to an AFI.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marisol, for that response. With this, we've concluded the questions available in our Q&A feature. We've got a couple minutes left. So what I'll do is turn to each of our panelists to provide a last bit of insight. So what is your tip or trick? What are your recommendations for folks that are immersed inside of this supply and logistics space, specifically for those health workers at the point of service delivery? Let's start with, who would like to go first? Solo, do you want to go first?
I can. No,
Oh, Adama, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's the kind of panel that the webinar that we need really to have generally to share the experiences. And I'm sure that anybody in this panel has some experiences to share. But, you know, for the topic today on health worker, I think it's key that without VVM for these vaccines that are, you know, in the system, we really based on the monitoring of our, you know, supply chain to make sure that at any time, at any level, we can really say, oh, we have put the monitoring devices with our vaccine. We have equipped our storage equipment with, you know, adequate monitoring devices. So we are able to say that the vaccine was kept in the right temperature during his journey from the central store to the last level. But to add that, the responsibility here is really on the health worker himself. And I'm really stressing that because no technology can really make the difference if the health worker is not involved in terms of training, in terms of knowing what are the
Wonderful, Adama. Thank you so much. Let's now go to Solo. And Solo, as you respond, we've got a question here that maybe you want to weave into your response.
Yeah, please.
It's about how countries can navigate the trade-off between the number of different types of vaccine products versus their resources and their cold chain equipment. So any tips and insight on that question is very appreciated.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first of all, before using any vaccine product, I think the program should ensure that it has gathered all the information on statutory information and programmatic information on that vaccine product to avoid the confusion, and to ensure that the health workers that are in charge of service delivery know these different products the program is procuring. The second thing that is really important in that, especially with this context now, where you have different vaccine overlapping, it is the labeling. No matter the vaccine, different vaccine you are receiving, if you have all the vaccine that keep their original labels, and then this indication is provided I think it is always a good practice that is avoid misuse of different product, taking one product for another product. So ensure that your vaccines keep their original labels, I mean the boxes, the secondary packs, and goes with the national or the manufacturer's product information sheet. If not possible for each health facility, just make a summary of a different product by your own program. It can be just one pager where you summarize the key information on each product to deliver that to the service delivery. So these two information are really important. Knowing the products and having a appropriate labeling of the different products will avoid today that you have this mix of different vaccines that are available. Over.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Salam. And over to Marisol. So Marisol, as you provide your last words of guidance, could you also respond to the last question that just popped up, which is, which COVID-19 vaccine products have a vaccine biomonitor?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the COVID-19 vaccine products that we presented have VVM. So they do not have VVM. Because to determine what is the right type of VVM, the appropriate VVM to be put on a vaccine vial, it has to undergo several stability testing to really see like for how long the vaccine can remain stable at certain temperature for when exposed for a certain number of times. So this has to be established first, and I believe that these kind of tests are still being done. And once the stability test is fully understood, that's the time when the vaccine manufacturer can provide the right VVM for each of these vaccines.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marisol. And with that, we have concluded our webinar session for today. So a huge thanks to Marisol for her wonderful presentations, to Marisol, Adama, and Solo for their wonderful responses during the Q&A, for our ECHO team, for all of the organization, our interpreters, for all of their hard work interpreting, and of course, many thanks to all of our participants for joining the session and for asking these really insightful questions. With that, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, and look forward to seeing you on our future webinars.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.